So Jill is a senior trainer with The Right Mind, and she specialises in capacity building for businesses and individuals, and specifically in leadership and performance. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you, Jo, very much. And thank you for being invited. And I look forward to this session, doing it collectively with Basil and Ken. I think I've got the easy part of this job, in the sense I'm going to set up what I'll call a few golden rules, particularly in around boundary setting, to be a consultant in rural or local communities. But I'm going to leave the hard stuff to Basil and Ken, who will hopefully bring forth this depth of experience of how to do it, and like all of us, maybe sometimes how not to do it. So look, first of all, I'm going to really focus on to do one of the hardest things when you work in a community or a regional area is the fact that you know so many people. It's a very, very personal place to operate from. And there's lots of friends, there's lots of families and so forth. So it's one of the bigger challenges, I think, of being an extremely good advisor in rural Australia, or anywhere for that matter, and agriculture. The piece I'd like to put on the end of it, I think it's, if it is not done well, it's also one of the things that will hurt you the most long term. And yet, in my experience, still to this day, it was never talked about with me in the early stages of being a consultant. And I still don't hear it being talked about very much. So I'm delighted this is the subject matter that has actually turned up. So I did a little bit of, to my world of how I've got to be here. Yes, I've got all of the training, but I'm now sort of nearly 30 years as a consultant. And I'm going to be very, very open and honest and upfront that I think in the first 10 years of being a consultant, I got it incredibly wrong. And so I'm going to run through my thoughts on it, hand it over to Basil and Ken. And the reason I want to say this, I've got two statements I want to say up front. And that is, if you don't do something in relation to setting expectations and boundaries about how you work, where you work, and what sort of work, for that matter, that you do, there's only one person that loses, and that's you. That's you as an individual. And that's you and your family regularly get to lose, and your client base and your community regularly are the ones that do great benefit. And because your client and your community get the greatest benefit, it's very, very addictive to keep doing things that stretch all of your boundaries. But I want to bring home, you are the only one that gets to lose about it. There is no perfect way to operate in small communities or regional Australia. So there's no perfect way, but there's an awful lot of things of how you should not do it, or the risks that you that bring to it. So for those of you that have got a pen, can I ask you to write one thing down for me? And pretty much everything that I'm going to allude to you, and potentially a lot of what Basil and Ken bring to you will fit under this statement, and I'm going to challenge you to remember it on a regular basis. And that is, we teach people how to treat us. We always teach people how to treat us. So I'm hoping that makes sense when I get into this little bit that I'm going to run through. What I mean by that is, if there are things about how your consulting life is going that's not overly working for you, you're feeling stretched, people are demanding of you, you don't have time as a person, it's all given to your client base. Could I challenge you that it's not the community, it's not your clients that are doing that to you. It will in fact be the fact that you haven't set a boundary for them to behave any other way. So we teach them that it's okay to ring us at 11 o'clock at night, and things like that take away from our quality of life. Behind us, I've just got this is what I use in the leadership training. So those of you who have done leadership training with me will have seen that. It's basically comes from that, but I think it's got a real place here. If you're going to be a sustainable consultant in your community, I think you've got to put boundaries and expectations about how you're going to do it in these number of levels. And the single biggest one will be, what are your boundaries and expectations as a person? These are what I'll call the very, very personal stuff about when people can contact you, when they can see you, how much they can demand of you, how much they can expect from you, and so forth. Sits in and around this area. This is the one that worries me the most, because this one is the one that if we give away a lot of this, we actually get to do this stuff remarkably well. And so the draw to doing it is substantial within it. Yet this is the one where we lose out when we don't get it right here and we don't get it clear, which I'm going to talk about. This is the one where we lose at a personal level, we lose time, we lose money, we lose relationships, and we lose a lot of energy that can't go into other things that are ultimately important to us. And then there are boundaries we need to set with other people. This is what I'll call our client area. Do our clients actually know where things start and where things stop? And I'm going to give a little bit around just some specifics on it. And then at organisations levels, I'm assuming all of you work in a business or work in a community, so I'll do these two together. These are the ones where people keep asking of you and you keep saying yes to it. But do we ever say to the football club where our clients are often at, or to the race committee, that I'm terribly sorry, I can't be available on the committee between the months of May and August, because that's my heaviest work period with my clients, but I'm available every other time? Would they have that level of clarity to know when to demand from you? And so one of the reasons I'm bringing these up is if you are able to set boundaries and expectations clearly, then the number of times you have to say no to people becomes a lot less. And as a consultant that lives in a community, the ability to say no is particularly difficult. And I think it really pressures us, and we suffer from that at times. So I hope you wrote down, we teach people how to treat us. The second bit that I'd love you to write down is that one of the reasons people keep treating you and asking of you is because they don't know. There is not clarity about what they can ask of you and what they can't ask of you. So I'd really challenge everybody out there to go, why do I need boundaries in this part of my life? Why do I need a boundary here? And then what would that look like? And then the third one is you have to communicate it. You need to get that message out to your clients, other organisations, community organisations. How are you going to inform them about how you're going to do business and what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, and when they can and when they can't do things with you? Are these private conversations you'll need to have with these clients? Are these things that need to be put in a written form? And are these things that the first time you have a contact with a client or an organisation, it's made perfectly clear? It can, I look back over time and I look at some of the bigger failings that I probably did along the way. I thought I was clear about things with particular clients, and in hindsight, I implied what my boundaries and expectations were. They weren't explicit. And so therefore, I couldn't expect them not to ask things of me. And therefore, I was subject to that pressure that might have come from that. So yes, please make any of those things that are important to you absolutely explicit. And then the very sort of the last area that I'd love you to think about is that I think one of the challenges that we've got is we don't know, we feel uncomfortable when we have to give bad news to people that we both in the community with and our clients. And we feel uncomfortable when we actually have to say no. And the phrase that I'd love you to write down, and I'll put some bits around this, is that at all times, we need to always separate the person or the people we're working with from the issue or the job we've been engaged to do. So separate the person or the people from the job or the issue that you're working with. And that has a lot to do with language. And I don't think we know that language in a way that it just comes out when we need it. And it can be as simple as learning things like when they come and see you at a function and they want to talk to you about the business work you did with them a week ago and, something technical, and you just don't. You are at the football or you're at the races and the last thing you want to talk about is your work. How do you need to in advance to know how do you actually put a boundary in place for somebody in their conversations without doing that offense. And and people are going to do it differently. But one of my suggestions is where you actually acknowledge what they've said and say, that's great. That's something I'd really like to talk to you about. But right now I'm not at work. Right now I'm not being a consultant. Can we leave that for a week's time and move the conversation on? I think it's incredibly healthy that you are able to have significant conversations that don't involve work with clients that are also you have to do community work for. So they're the sort of what I'll call a couple of the substantial pieces that I'd love you just to, when setting up how you'd be an advisor, how you'd be a consultant, first of all, why do you need to have the boundaries in place? Is it for your own mental health? You need to make sure that your time and the things that are important to you are protected and you can do them to be well and healthy. Is the why because your family deserves your best time? So instead of, I'm going to challenge hardworking people, and I fall into this area where we regularly give our best energy to our clients. And yet the people that need you the most and deserve your best energy are probably the ones that you go home to, and you're too damn tired to give them that. Even though you may be in their presence, you don't give them that quality. And so the damage turns up. And so at the end of the day, again, you get to lose. And so I'd just like you to think through why it is you'd need to put boundaries in place. And I'd love it if you could explicitly then say, what would that look like? What does that look like with my clients when I first meet them? What does that look like when I agree to do something? And then the last piece is how. How do I give that to them? How do I communicate it to them so they are clear and we teach them how we're going to do business as opposed to them assuming how we do business? i.e., if they ring you at 8 o'clock every single night while you're having dinner and you answer the phone, there's nothing wrong with the client. You have taught them by answering it. It's an absolutely appropriate thing to do. So this can go into lots of areas. So I just wanted to give an overall overreaching thing about what will give you a quality of life as a sustainable advisor and consultant, and at the same time deliver really professionally and highly in your role and your profession and your career. So that's the sort of where I'd like to leave what I've got to offer. And I'm going to give what I'll call the substance of how to be a good consultant advisor in your local communities to those who are, which is good, back on the ground after COVID, doing the real stuff again, and their depth of experience. And I think one of the things that we'll probably hear from both Basil and Ken is going to be that you do learn along the way and you do stumble. And I guess what we'd love to leave with you is, I would personally love it if you guys didn't have to stumble as many times as we may have done and learnt the hard way. May you get these things in place up front, and therefore puts you in a better position, a more sustainable position. And therefore you get to give back to that community and that industry for much, much longer. So on that note, and I think the most important thing about this webinar that we're doing is the questions that you guys might have for us at the end. Really, this is about you guys, and everyone will be different. And you've potentially turned up on this call because there's something about this space that you'd like to do better or know better. So I think it's a matter of extracting that from the three of us as we do. So on that note, I will take the pressure off myself and shift it sideways to Ken, who has not only a depth of knowledge, but also has a delightful way of sharing with the world the journey that he's taken. And Ken, if I could sort of ask you or open up your story and your learnings by saying, what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that as a consultant that's been there and done it, you would very much have wanted to have known much earlier, or at least have done better, and therefore your journey would have been a better one. What could you run through those for us, Ken?
Yeah, I don't believe one of the issues that a lot of consultants when they first start out, they want to be liked. And I think you've got to temper that, but aim to be respected, and then you'll ultimately be liked. You know, people sometimes are quite accommodating and very friendly, and they become liked, and the objectivity of the client to be able to assess the value of your work may not be there. But I think creating boundaries, I think I needed to, if I had my life over again as a consultant, I would create better boundaries. I'd have, like I started my consulting business from scratch, just myself. And so therefore I had no framework or guidelines or somebody looking over my shoulder to keep check on me. And mine was a case of discovery. And I reckon, Jill, your 10 years of supposed failure has made you an absolute success in them. So I think failure is a part of success. But if I had to just quickly go through some of the issues inside my boundary management is, you know, there's the simple one-liners. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So in a local community, if their first impression of you is being under the weather at the footy club, well, you probably won't get the work. So it's keeping yourself tidy. And, you know, time management in a consulting business is absolute paramount, because it's one multiplied by the other. Time management multiplied by your skill and knowledge. That's really important. And I think delivering on your promises is just absolute paramount, because I see a lot of consultants who deliver and then they've got all the excuses under the sun why they haven't been able to do it. But all those excuses have got the client that's of no concern to them. You've made a promise and they were building their expectation around it. So please keep your promises. And one of the things I've picked up from Jill is discipline. Your personal discipline is one of the greatest boundary managements. And when I look at, you know, really successful clients, they're the ones that just get everything done on time and they deliver on what they've said. So when I go to visit a client, I will have the phone call and they'll say to me, yeah, this is what I want to do. And I've got a broad understanding, but as soon as I arrive at the client's business, I'll actually sit with them and I personally will write the brief, and then I'll paraphrase it back to them. So I've got a clear understanding and we both get on the same boat to China. With that, what could happen if you didn't do that? You could be going down a path that's slightly different to your client, and then all of a sudden you realise that you've ineffectively used the first hour or whatever of your time. So the process is important in the content, and with that paraphrasing or getting the written brief, at the end of the consult, I go back to the brief, reread it to them and say, have I delivered on what you wanted me to? And I instantly read the body language. If they say yes, but the body language is saying no, I'll say, well, we need to, I'm quite happy to put in another half an hour or whatever. But the other important thing is, when you begin with the end in mind of what you got to do, you start throwing darts at the dartboard. They're not landing on the ground. So you're actually targeted with your questions, and it gives you real focus. Did you want to throw a question in there, Jill, at all?
Look, one of my questions would be because you covered off on a couple of lovely ones there, and I'm going to pick two in particular that I support of you, and that is that bit about being liked. You know, in those early days, we work hard in order to build reputation, and then we don't know how not to at times. So and in Australia, we have a habit of, I guess, congratulating people who almost work themselves to death. And it's not one of our great traits. And the brief, can I make a comment that the brief is never accurate unless you've absolutely clarified it? So I think they're the two that I didn't bring up that's lovely. But Ken, if there was one really specific area that you think is ultimately important over and above anything else, what would you pick?
I reckon if you're in a single consultant business, I reckon developing one or two mentors that, you know, if you can fast track your learning and have somebody to bounce the ideas off, I reckon that's critically important. And, you know, if you're in a single consulting business, like I don't hide the fact that I had a major mental breakdown in 2019 and ended up in a mental health hospital in Melbourne, and that was due to overcommitment at work. But I've been a single guy for 20 odd years, and I was getting to the point where I would, my work, I was dealing with people all the time, and then when it came to the weekend, I was just not socialising with anybody because I'd had enough of people. So, and then living at home on your own, it is a very lonely existence. So it eventually took a toll on me. And whereas if I had had a mentor, I reckon that would have been all shortchanged. And having the ability to let the mentor almost make a decision for you, you don't have to make it. And you make it from the point of view you respect your mentor so much that if they say something like, Ken, no more, then that's exactly what I do. So I reckon for me in a single business now, multiple people in a business, hopefully they've got a structure where the older consultants are not just looking over, but they actually have a mentor role for the young people in the business to help them grow and develop and not make the same mistakes as us older ones.
Would you recommend different mentors for different reasons?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've spent a lot of time in my latter time of my, if you work in the area of succession, for instance, one of the critical issues there is emotional intelligence. And I've come across a lot of people who are highly intellectual, but emotionally dumb. And, you know, and most of the relationships that have failed in farming businesses are due to poor emotional intelligence. So, yeah, I reckon that's a pretty important area to understand.
Any advice on how to seek out those mentors?
Oh, well, you will have read, and don't ever think that a person who you hold up on a pedestal, so to speak, will never be your mentor. You're better off to have tried and failed, or in other words, they have not agreed to it, that because most people care about young people, particularly if they're wanting to have a red hot go and they're wanting to go somewhere in life. I've mentored bloody dozens of young people, and to sit off now and see where they've got to in life and how they've gone about it, that's just one of the greatest rewards I've had in life. And so don't ever think that somebody won't be your mentor, and try and make sure they're different. I reckon, remember, first and foremost, we're in the people game. It's not about pastures and bloody livestock in the first instance. You've got to make sure you're getting better as a people person as you're going forward.
Yeah, which is lovely to hear. And I would support the fact that over the years I have had several mentors, and I'm going to challenge you all out there to be brave about the people that you think might be good for you, and to ask them. Not once, both here and internationally, when I've asked somebody would they actually be my ear, have they said no. So I think you'd be surprised at those that will do it, you know, provided they can. And so be brave and seek them out. If there was one last comment, Ken, you would like them to hear from you, what would that be?
There's probably 2 points. Just briefly on one point you made in your opening remarks, Jill, was when it comes to learning how to say no, I don't believe that I really never learned how to say no, but I did learn how to package yes better. So yeah, when you learn how to package yes better, you get it back on your terms. Like the example Jill used, I'm not available for me. You know, people wanted me to go on committees, and I'd say, well, I can't attend all meetings, but I can attend 3/4 of them or something like that. If you're happy with that, then I'll be happy to contribute. It just takes that little bit of pressure off where you may not have to attend a couple of things. And the last point I would make is that if I was involved in a conversation in a pub, for instance, and I would remember confidentiality is number one in consulting. So if you get into a pub conversation, you might be anonymously talking about a family, but the listeners will always try to be guessing who you're talking about. And in the end, they will settle on the family that they think it is. And I had a case where a lady from central New South Wales was delivering a workshop in South Australia, and one of the Department of Ag people came up to her at the end and said, could I give you a bit of advice? Don't talk about a local family when you're using the example. And the lady said, well, I was talking about a family who live about 20 k's north of Dubbo. And anyhow, so there was just such similarities. And the bad thing is, at the end, the people who've tried to put 2 and 2 together, but they got 6, they go and talk to other people and say, Ken Solly said this, this, and this, when I didn't. So I avoid talking about case studies. I contribute very little to pub conversation, but if I do, only talk in little bits so that they can't identify.
I think that's delightful advice, and all of us are nothing in the absence of our credibility and our reputation, and confidentiality does sit at the bottom of that. So I concur. Please do everything you can out there not to let them have assumptions or to hallucinate about things they really don't know. So nicely put, Ken. And can I thank you, Ken, for the level of honesty? It's nice. I think this is the real world, and it's always nice for us to put them out. Thank you. Basil, if I could move across to you, talking about depths and breadths of experience. I'm sure you've got it perfect from day one, so we'd like to hear how you did that. But the same question goes, that if there's those sort of 1, 2 or 3 things that if you could have known or could have done better, it would have made the world of difference to your advisory consulting time.
Yeah. If prior to this, Ken did submit some notes, which I thought, I read through them and thought, there's the young consultants glove box handbook. And if he could make those available, I reckon that would be great. And I just wanted to reflect on a couple. And at the risk of repeating the confidentiality one again, for me, again, that's number one. There's so many times that you will get the opportunity to be part of something pretty big, and there's a real threat to want to let everyone know that you were part of it. You know, $500 million, $1 billion deal, you're only a little part of it, but it seems like a pretty big deal. And, you know, we've got egos and we like to brag about things. So that's one area I'd say, you know, to be very careful in. I actually got called out as breaching confidentiality on an occasion at a local hall event. And like for 2 to 3 weeks, I couldn't figure out how it had got out. I was, at the start, I was 100% sure it wasn't me. After 3 weeks, I was back at about 95%, I reckon. Eventually came out that their son got pissed in the pub and had revealed it. But it was a horrible experience. So it wouldn't be one I'd ever want to experience for the wrong reasons, let alone maybe the right reasons. So confidentiality. Another one that Ken had was, avoid making decisions for clients. That's a real trap. And I think the more technical you are, and the more you may work for an organisation or company that leans towards dependency-based models, the more of that there can be. That creates a rod for your back, because you actually, when you make the decision, you actually own the outcome, and you're in a world of hurt, because then it just goes on and on and on. So one of the things I would try, I would say, is try to get yourself into an organisation eventually that supports capacity building in their clients. The other one is that Ken had, now, like I border on being a rule breaker, I guess, but I'm definitely a rule bender. Don't consult the friends. I battle because I'm really gregarious and I love socialising, and a lot of my clients become friends. And so I'm not prepared to give them up at that time. In fact, that's my most enjoyable period, when they become a client and a friend over time. I've got clients that I would not charge just to be associated with them now. I enjoy their company and the stimulus around the business and the consulting so much. So I think for me, I've just learned to deal with that. And they often, they're the clients that often say to me, we actually don't know whether we pay you for your advice or your funny stories, Basil. And to me, they're the days when you truly doing what you love and calling it work. And they just fly for me. The other one was mentors. And I've had some fantastic mentors, some imposed and some that I've gone to myself. They've all been beneficial. But one of the things with mentors, as I've moved through my career, and I don't think my career is one that's changed that much in terms of what I do over a long period of time. Like, I've loved the on-farm consulting process so much that I've just chosen to stay there. But I know that I've mentored people at a technical level and at a business level, and had to give them up as they go to governance and administrative levels. And I think we don't recognise those points in our career often where we need a second mentor, or we need to change or recruit another mentor. So they're the points that Ken raised that, I thought in my mind they were the most critical for me. The key areas for me is like delivering advice that people don't necessarily like, or I had a lot issue probably 2 to 3 years into my consulting career when I had a very strong client base and I was introducing clients to clients. I'd have someone looking for adjustment and I'd have someone wanting to adjust, and I knew they were both good business people and that, there was a win-win there. But expectations are a funny thing, and someone often comes up short, and I got caught in the middle of a lot of those, and I don't get caught in the middle of them anymore. I'm very well disciplined in the area of introducing clients for mutual benefit, but stepping straight back. And I actually went and saw a lawyer about it, because I actually thought I had a conflict of interest, and she was really good. She said to me, "You got a conflict of conscience, not a conflict of interest." And she said, "You don't stand to benefit out of that partnership, so there's no conflict of interest." So the concept of conflict of conscience was one for me that sat with me for like 20 years. It's like I can just turn it on and go, "Oh, that's just your conscience saying, get the hell out of it now that you've made the introduction." Another area is I travel a lot, and I enjoy that. And particularly I spend 6 to 8 weeks in Africa every year, and pretty much all my clients there are now friends. And I think if I hadn't learned to mix consulting with socialising, it'd be a very lonely 6 to 8 weeks sitting in a hotel room in South Africa. So I think if you set those boundaries, both you and Ken talked about, you can have the best of both worlds. but it's sometimes a tricky rope to walk. The other thing, the final thing for me is like learning to accept that you only provide advice and that good decisions can have poor outcomes, and you need to take clients back in time often to the decision point and gone, was it truly a bad decision or was it a good decision with a bad outcome? That was just another thing that I learned in a workshop somewhere along the line that's just stood me in really good stead of hindsight's just not available prior to it being available. And then I just wanted to make a point off the back of what I heard Ken say about being a single operator. I've never been a single operator. I've had a lot of people around me make mistakes that I haven't had to make. So I had 13 years, I think, or 12 with the department, when the department was an awesome, awesome training ground for consultants. So I didn't have to go straight into a consulting firm with the pressure of billable hours. And then I went into a 2-person business, and they both tried and failed 4 times before they'd made it work. So they knew everything you could possibly do wrong and everything you needed to do right. And now I'm in a big consulting firm with a lot of people around me, a lot of specialists. And that thing that Ken mentioned about managing or packaging yes is so much easier when you've got people to defer to. So my managing the yes, I still never say no, but the packaging yes is like, I've never heard it phrased like that, but that's gold. Is I'm really disciplined around, not a problem, I can get that done for you, but it's going to be 6 weeks. And I let them say no. Or I can't do it, but I've got Jason or Leanne or Sally or someone else who can do it, and they decide whether they are prepared to wait or no, it's time critical and we go to someone else. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Basil, thank you. I mean, that's you have probably packaged together and supported, I think, a lot of what Ken said. But you add an awful lot to it. If you don't mind, I'm probably going to take that conflict of conscience as a phrase, if it's okay. It actually captures a really significant internal struggle that you have, and yet it's perfectly that's put. I'd love to make the comment about as you have said, some of my closest friends today have started out as clients, like very, very deep friends, and there is a way to do it. And I think one of the things is always be really clear, when are you being a friend and when are you being a client with them? And you almost need to state it. So, as your advisor now, I think you've got to get really clear when you're one or the other, and it does help it, and put those boundaries in place and always check them. I think it's the greatest place to find deep friendship. So may the rest of you also take that journey. And for those of us that have travelled a lot, it is actually remarkably important when you're on the road to have that connection. I'm hoping also that Ken will write us a 1-page cheat sheet on what packaging yes looks like, and circulate that, Ken. We'd be all grateful for you of what it looks like. I, for the first time in my life, have had to learn to actually say no. And I think it is ridiculously hard. And so learning techniques in advance before you have to do it with your clients is worth the discipline. So before I sort of summarise it together, Basil, if there was just one thing that you'd like them to either reiterate, or this is the one thing that you should never forget, what would that be?
Look, for me, I think it's following on from a point you made about, we teach people how to treat us, is that the way you want to be treated changes with priorities over time. And it's critical to retrain. Yeah. And that's an even bigger challenge than training them in the first place, because they're old dogs by then, a lot of them. But you do have to go through that process, and there'll be familiar ringtones like politicians retiring at the top of their game to spend more time with their family. And, you know, our priorities do change, and we have to learn to retrain the client base. Like I was definitely, you can ring me not only any time, but any day of the week, anywhere in the world, and I will answer the phone. But I loved what I did so much, and I was in a space of learning as much off them as they were from me, and trying to disguise that fact, that it didn't worry me. But now you won't get me after 7:30, 8 o'clock, but you can ring me at 4:30 in the morning. That's still fine. I'm up and around. But and the other thing is, I reckon that people nowadays need to learn how to discipline themselves around the electronic side of the game and mobile phones. Like, we didn't start with those. I can remember the first email I sent in the building. I ran up the hall to see if I could beat it to the person I'd sent it to. We've got this, I've got this casualness about answering emails and phone calls and messages that I'm sure frustrates a lot of my younger clients, and I actually don't know how young consultants cope with it. So that's, again, the teaching others how you want to be treated.
And I think if I could add to that, we should reevaluate every year or every couple of years. Do we need to shift where the boundaries are? We've taught people already how to treat us, but do we need to shift it? i.e. we've got 3 young children now. Do I need to change when I'm contactable? Which comes back to, let's get clear on it, let's communicate it back, and then be really, really disciplined. I'd be happy to run a whole session with anybody about how to not be subject to technology so that you do still have a quality of life, because they're beautiful, but they will also destroy us if we don't do it particularly well. Thank you so much, Basil. If I'm to put a bit of that together in one phrase before, and we'd really like to open up to you guys to ask us questions, it would be the best thing, I think, to get the most from us, is, if I can paraphrase Ken, we are and we will always be in the human game. So how do we manage human follies, and how do we put things in place and respect in a respectful way, so that they get huge value and we have a sustainable and high value life as well? Because it is advisory and consulting is a giving. We are giving away ourselves, which can be highly energizing, but if it's a one-way street without limits, it's got high risk for that. And we need an industry that's got heaps of great, really good advisors and consultants out there. So we need you. We don't want you to burn out. So please sit down, think about it, get the clarity, and then it's a discipline. At the end of the day, it becomes a discipline. So on that note, I'd like to hand it back to Joe. And look, I'm speaking on behalf of Ken and Basil. We'll answer anything that we think we can answer for you.
Thank you very much, Jill, Ken and Basil. I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did. I can see some questions. So given the size of the audience and the time we have available, I think it's fine if you are happy to ask your question over by unmuting. So the first question is from Meg Bell.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Jill, Ken and Basil and Joe for putting on today. My camera's off, sorry, because my internet's a little bit dodgy. You'll just have to hear my voice. Ken and Basil, thanks so much for sharing your experiences. I always genuinely love hearing from both of you. And I think just having you being in the room and being very candid is really, really important and helpful to us as younger consultants, or to me in particular. So a question about, and this maybe Jill can provide a little bit more on this as well. I reckon I've got some good boundaries with my clients, but I don't know that I'm communicating them very well. So, and I probably do have a bit of an issue with like, what's the best way to do it? So maybe just, I don't know, Jill, could you give us maybe some examples of how you might actually do that communicating, or Ken and Basil, if you've done that to your clients?
I think it can be a bit situational, so you might want to give us something a little bit specific. It depends on what the boundary is. I'm going to suggest that it's not ambiguous. That's the biggest thing a lot of the times it's implicit and it's ambiguous. So if it's around time, or if it's around, I'm trying to think what you might have there, that 9 times out of 10, I like to say it in person and it is followed up in writing. And in my case, particularly where clients are with you for a long period of time, I still to this day will sit down and go, because all boundaries get stretched. I want you to get, because the world's not perfect. So you have them explicitly and they're very, very tight up front. And then if you let them go, then you come back in 2 months' time and go, look, I was really happy to do all that for you then, but I now need you to know that I can't do this piece, or I won't do this piece from this point forward. So it's not a one-off. It is a constant re-engagement. And so, yes, there are some absolute boundaries, and then there are what I'll call situational ones. And you just need to talk about it, and where appropriate, follow it up in writing. And when they breach it, you get the chance to go, well, I can't take the call now. Happy to ring tomorrow morning unless it's ultra urgent. Can we do that? Yeah, sure. You correct them politely once and you'll find that stops to some degree, excluding the 0.01% who are just high maintenance clients. And we don't have time to talk about them. Ken, Basil, any comment?
Look, I have a little verbal business card, I reckon, where my clients will find out a lot about me in a very short period of time. I'll endeavour to find out a lot about them. They'll know that I've got lots of things going on beyond consulting, and the reason they can't get me or won't get me is I'm, in inverted commas, busy. And they'll tell me how busy I am, and I think they think I'm lots busier than what I actually am. But that's just how I do it. I don't do engagement agreements. I'm really casual in that space. I just do the work, send an invoice, love email for report writing now. That's one thing that's, freed up so much of my time. But that's how I do it. It's just, I'll tell you who I am on the first drive around the farm. You'll know everything about me, and that'll help you understand what's going on in the world.
From my perspective, I reckon the last 10 years, like I'm semi-retired now. Semi-retired means you're only working about 90%. So I reckon, I reckon I would have only had about 10 out-of-hours phone calls in the last 10 years of my consulting, because I just had to say to people up front, I don't particularly want to receive out-of-hours phone calls. I try to put it in their terms and say, well, look, I'm quite happy to, I'll refuse to ring anybody after about 5:30 at night, because I want to respect your time. You've sort of got to be a little bit of a role model in that regard. But some of the other boundary management measures, I know you work from home, but I had a home office for the last 5 years, and it was just too convenient to end up back in the office at night, particularly when you live on your own. And then I just had to make the conclusion that at the end of the day, it was 7 o'clock, I said, right, I'm out of here regardless of the circumstance. And most importantly, I shut the door, because it was a bedroom that I'd converted into an office. And I didn't want to be able to look in that office and trigger my brain. And the other thing is, if you can get the office away from the house, and that creates that physical separation, that when you drive away from your office, you start to relax because you're driving away from work. You're not still living in it, because that's one of the greatest dilemmas farmers have got, is that they live and work on the same spot, and they can never fully switch off. And their home office is, their home phone is their office phone, and whenever they go to pick it up, they're always shitting themselves that it's going to be a work-related thing, and their brain never really switches off. So getting some of those personal boundaries in. If you start to put time restrictions on yourself, then you never get anywhere unless you got the blowtorch on your bum in life. You've got to have some heat. and you've got to create your own heat, particularly in the area of time management, because it's time multiplied by dollars that makes the thing. A lot of people that become poor time managers, to make up for lost time, they work lost output. They work longer and longer to try and make it up, and it's quite silly. At the end of the day, you're on a downward spiral, and there's no for some people there's no coming back.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you, panel. Thanks, Meg, for the great question. So we have time for another couple of questions. If any of the participants would like to unmute and ask a question, feel free. I have one, so I'll take the facilitator's prerogative and pose mine, if that's all right. I picked up on something that both Basil and Ken touched on about the difference in being part of a larger organisation versus being a sole trading consultant. And I wondered how you all felt. How do you recognise if you are cut out for sole trading, or what would you see as the key differences in terms of your approach as a consultant?
Yeah, well, I know I'm not cut out to be a sole trader because I'm so gregarious. I just want people around me, but at the same time, I don't want any responsibility for anyone else. So that's kind of me, and I'm in the best spot ever now, where I've got heaps and heaps of good people around me, and like, I care for them as humans, but I don't have to take any responsibility for them as employees, which is so great. But you'll never make more money than being a sole operator, because that's such an efficient model. But yeah, there's a lot of lonely times in that space from what others tell me. That's the big downside. Got lots of consultant client friends outside our business who are typically, not typically, but often a male consultant and a female support person. And we've talked about them coming into our business, and the support person is always so pro wanting to get in there, and the consultant can't get past dropping the income. It's really weird, but so common. We would have interviewed at least 10 people to come into Pinion as sole operators, and they've all walked because the boys said, I'm not going backwards in money to go forwards in a social side of it or professional development or whatever else.
Well, mine was probably a little bit like, I had 15 and a half years as a TAFE lecturer, and whilst I didn't have to put up with all the meetings, but the bureaucracy and and to some degree the politics inside a large organisation really wasn't all that palatable to me. And I always thought, if I could get out of bed and do what I want, how I want, and when I want, I was 90% the way to job satisfaction. And I sensed that I could do that on my own. And in terms of making money, the biggest year I had as a consultant was when I had 2 full-time ladies and 5 part-time consultants working for me. But I found that was probably a huge year. It nearly wrecked me in terms of keeping it all under control. So I eventually went back to being on my own with a secretary, the model that Basil talked about. But the other little comment I was right, when I went to consult to anybody, I never ever wanted to go back and do the exact same work on that farm. I wanted to be moving to a new level. And the other thing that helped me a lot was my enterprise mix wasn't just consulting. And it had, in the first instance, I did some project management, which actually helped put bread and butter on my plate. But then in my latter years, I was spending time just traveling Australia, speaking at conferences and running training workshops. So I always, when I sought one opportunity, I was trying to create another opportunity out of that opportunity, and believe it or not, it nearly always happened. So I was never sitting around waiting for my next job to come along or wonder where it was. The next opportunity was quite often a new challenge, or quite often off in a different direction, and you've still got to know where the line is between what you're capable of doing. You know, like you've got to know where the line in the sand is, because as a consultant, there's about 12 different roles you'll have, and you'll use about probably 5 of them in any consult. You'll be an advisor, you'll be a sounding board, you'll be a counsellor, you'll be a confidant. All those things happen all in the one consult. But then when you start to, they build so much confidence in you, then all of a sudden you're talking about financial management and financial planning, and you're not bloody qualified to speak in that area. So you've got to know where that line in the sand really is, because you could get yourself into an enormous amount of trouble if you don't know where that line is.
Thank you very much. We are pretty much smack on time. So if there's no further questions, I would like to thank Jill, Ken and Basil very much for a really fabulous webinar and a great start to the Livestock Advisor Updates webinar series for 2022. So thank you very much, and we will be sharing the recording via the Livestock Advisor Updates webpage. There are 2 more webinars to come this year, and also we have everything crossed for face-to-face events in the south, the north and the west for the LAU program this year. So those dates are being released at the moment, with the northern save the date already out, and southern and western save the dates to come out next week. So thank you very much, everybody, for your participation in today's webinar. Yes.